in the African continent and within even our structures of the African Union, there's a lot of competition. Sometimes someone launches something, the others don't. I mean, so what we are saying in our report is be pragmatic. There's a major crisis. There's an emergency, of conflict.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Bad Natives podcast. With me in Nairobi, Charles Onyango Obo.
And I am Robert Kapshinga, the bad native from Uganda, speaking to you from Geneva. Charles, now I understand why my home area was called the Switzerland of Africa. This place is wonderful.
So which one is the more beautiful, Kigezi or Switzerland?
There's no money for guessing. Chigezi remains the most beautiful place.
Today with us we have two wonderful guests, and I'll say something briefly about them, and then they will fill in the bits I've missed. First is Lizo Lo Vodren. Lizo is based in Johannesburg, and she works between Johannesburg and Addis Ababa, where she is the International Crisis Group Senior Advisor on the African Union. Welcome, Lizo.
Thank you very much.
And our other guest is an old friend of both Bob and myself. He is Ambassador Fred Ngoga. Ngoga is a Burundian diplomat and is currently the Senior Advisor on International Partnership, the African Union Border Program, and Regional Security Mechanisms in the Office of the Commissioner for Political Affairs and Peace and Security of the AU. You guys have mouthful of titles, Fred. So Lizo, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yes, so I have been following the African Union pretty much all my life, Charles. I'm one of the few people who actually attended a meeting of the OAU. It shows a bit my age, but I don't mind saying that because you know where I'm coming from.
You don't look it.
Thank you. In Loma in 2000, actually, when the Constitutive Act of the African Union was being drafted, and so initially as a South African journalist, but then I worked for the Institute for Security Studies. You might know it's a think tank based in Pretoria, and also working on things like the Peace and Security Council report of the African Union, of the ISS. And I've been with Crisis Group now for 3 years. And basically, Crisis Group focuses on conflict prevention, research on the conflicts and the tensions and dynamics on the continent. So my role at Crisis Group is basically to inform my colleagues also of what the African Union is doing. It's sometimes a sort of a complicated landscape also of what the Peace and Security Council of the African Union decides on South Sudan or Sudan and so on or not. And then also we do the research we do. Every year we publish this big report on the priorities for Africa. And our research we discuss then with various actors, influential people like Fred. Hopefully he reads our reports. So I'm in between those two things, and I'm following. So this year, for example, we're looking at, well, I can list them later, but that's my job, to kind of promote, do the advocacy for the work. All our teams, we have a big team for Crisis Group, of course, across the continent, headquartered in Nairobi and then in Dakar and elsewhere, following all of this.
And Fred, you are right in the belly of the beast. Eh?
Correct.
He is the beast.
Charles, most people, I have, first of all, I want to say two things which are important. I love the Bat Native Studio, the Bad Natives program in general. When it started, I saw Robert and the old men of the clan, Andrew Mwenda, yourself, and I so enjoyed your first podcast on the elections in Uganda. Learned so much. So we follow you. And Liesel, I can't thank you enough for the great work that you do. Honestly, the last report which was published was spot on. Of course, there were some things that which are a bit tough, but we are honestly the work that they do helps us actually to also self-evaluate and to know what is it that we're doing well, what is it that we're not doing well. Charles, I want to say I've been with the AU for 17 years.
Whoa, good.
That's a
Yes,
long
and
time.
that's a long time, 17 years. And I started, Charles, you will recall, in Somalia with the deployment of AMISOM. So I've done peacekeeping. I became head of conflict prevention and early warning. And now I'm dealing with international partnerships, as Charles mentioned. So I kind of have a broad view about what works, what doesn't work, and why it doesn't work. Uh, and so I think that the one thing that we tend to uh, forget, and I think that we need to really emphasize it on it. And I said, Liesel, there is a French philosopher called Albert Camus who said that not naming things the right way is creating misery for the world. I think we have a we have a crisis of leadership on the
Mm,
continent. We
mm.
can talk about the lack of resources in the AU. We can talk about all sorts of things, but the reality is we have a crisis of leadership. And when I
Fred,
say
Fred,
crisis,
Fred,
sure.
I'll have to cut you. You know, you're not going into the, you are
Yeah.
going into the main course when we are still on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Standard.
Yeah,
Good.
The soup is. Huh?
Good,
yeah,
good, good.
it is. I am glad to see you are raring to go, but you know, before we go there, the summit just uh, looked at a series of the usual things, conflict, uh, financing, and all that. And Lizo, as you mentioned, you just brought out your annual report, and you are the report makes the argument that others have made that the AU as is today is not fit for purpose. But they and one of the reasons is that when that argument is made, it means that it is working in an environment for a world which has changed, which has moved on. So if Africa has changed since 2002, can each of you speak briefly to how you see Africa? How has Africa changed in these last 24, 25 years? Lizzo.
Yes, of course. It's changed massively, Charles. I mean, uh, Gen Z's the generation that we see on the streets of Madagascar and there where you are, Kenya and Tanzania and elsewhere. There's definitely a clamor for greater democracy, greater accountability from governments, greater connectivity. A lot has changed since definitely 25 years when the African Union was created. But we know the African Union is an organization of cooperation between states. I mean, it's been tried to be people centered, especially around 2013, 2012. With the former chair Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, there was a lot of popularization of the African Union for the People, Agenda 2063. But ultimately, it's an intergovernmental organization with states. And have our states changed? Have our leaders changed? These who sit around the table here, and in your previous podcast, you were talking a lot about Africa not being, at the table. Here's a table. This is Africa's table, is the African Union. And those people sitting around the table making decisions are the heads of state. We can't get around that. So, and then the what we in our report says is the commission, so the structures that are there that serve these heads of state need to also give them direction when it comes to things like mediation, conflict resolution. I mean, they the backup they provide the backup for heads of state. And I mean, it's not to excuse anyone or blame anyone. This is the reality of the organization we are dealing with. So to answer your question, of course it has vastly changed, but somehow some of the blockages we have is that some of the heads of state have been there for much more than 20 years, and yeah, the organization tries to serve all its constituencies. But yeah, it's ultimately an intergovernmental organization. And we can talk about, Sudan. And I think if you look at the UN today, and you look at Gaza, I think Sudan is a bit our wake up call or our big tragedy that we haven't been able to handle. But we can talk about that later. I'm just thinking, yeah, there's a lot of soul searching going on at the moment in Addis, amongst everyone involved, of moving forward. Of course, conflicts have also changed dramatically, and they're changing daily with new technology. And how do you stop these wars when it's little countries or smaller insurgencies can work with drones and stand up to big countries and so on. But
Yeah. Wow.
but yeah,
Uh,
the African Union's limits are there, basically.
Fred, you 17 years. How has the continent changed? Is it around you? Where do you feel? Some of Lizzo has mentioned warfare being one of those where we have seen a very dramatic shift. Where do you see that it has run ahead of you?
I think that the first thing that we can say has to do with the advent of social media. I think that people, as much as people can say, oh, we need to limit social media and so on and so forth, but the power of social media, uh, I think that people didn't anticipate that it could actually overthrow regimes, or it could actually exacerbate hate in our states. There is a famous person who once said that what idiots used to say in a bar is now on social media. It's there for everybody to see. And our governments are struggling to contain it. So that has been the first change. The second change, Lizo mentioned it, I think it has to do with our Gen Z. And I think that every time that I go home, my daughter always asks me, Daddy, what are you doing about Sudan? Daddy, what are you doing about South Sudan, Somalia, Sahel? In terms of values, Charles, our Gen Zs, they are what we could tolerate or what our parents could tolerate. They don't want to tolerate it anymore. They've had it enough, and they think that we can do better as a continent. So they're more demanding, and our political class is struggling to catch up with them. So that has changed. Now, as an organization, I would say that actually some good things have happened as well. For example, we have a peace and security architecture which is in place. We have the peace fund. Today, actually, I saw that in the report that the ICG did. They talked about 65% of the AU's budget is funded by external actors, but actually, no, it's actually less than that because now, when you look at the contribution of our member states, we have almost $400 million in the peace fund, and they are stepping up. We have adopted norms, but still, it is not having an impact on the ground. It's not improving the lives of our citizens. And by the way, when we were talking, I mentioned all these conflicts that are going on the continent. The fact of the matter is, we are all working on a daily basis on these conflicts, but there are certain forces that we cannot contain, which actually influence, and are external forces, by the way, which influence the trajectory of some of our conflicts that we're dealing with. I can tell you that every day when I get into the office in the morning, we talk about what is it that we're going to do about Libya, Sahel. We talk about the Horn of Africa, the Great Lakes. So we are actively working on it, and I think that where we have failed as the African Union is actually to communicate effectively to the citizens of Africa what is it that we do on a daily basis so that they know. Are we having an impact? No, not as much as we want to, but are we working to try to have an impact? Definitely 100%. So yes, so there are all these things that have changed, but I think that we need to meet the challenges of the moment.
Bob,
Ah,
you at least now you come of this from the private sector. You are the hard edge of things, hard end of things. You are an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. You are a public intellectual. What
Yes.
what do you see?
So first of all, Charles, I'm going to suggest a very small but symbolic reform, which I think will refocus us. The AU should stop receiving uh, the heads of states at the meetings with so much fanfare and ceremony, because it makes it look like just a jamboree. They turn up traditional dancers at Bole Airport and all of these. It just looks like a party. I think they should arrive quietly, walk into meetings, do serious business, get out. We are the only continent, Charles, where heads of state arrive to such fanfare and ceremony. The EU guys just turn up during the day on commercial flights, get in, do the business, get out. ASEAN, same story. So let's first rid ourselves of all of this ceremonial nonsense that just makes this appear like a jamboree. Let me park that, Charles. But I think that the AU could benefit the continent more by being a forum where we redefine the African direction. That's number one. And we rebuild the African bargaining position and power. What do I mean? There are three, from my point of view, Charles, big things that are facing the African continent, even though they are. So, number one is we need a collective position on technology and AI. Right now, I've just been reading a piece by a very good friend of mine who is in the data and tech business. African countries are accelerating regulatory laws rather than capacity to facilitate the growth of AI. They're not investing in capacity to store data, they're not investing in power. You don't see a continental approach at raising money for these things. What you see is writing laws and how we're going to control and regulate the thing that Fred is talking about, and without the enforcement mechanism. The other big deal, Charles, where Africa could AU could actually define a position is just on the question of trade. Right now, we have people in other markets that we trade with, and that's one of the reasons I'm out here. And they impose laws and regulations about how we can do business. And we have no response because we don't have a collective leadership. So that is step number two. Step number three, how can the AU be the place where African leadership puts its best foot forward? Where are the Thabo Mbekis? Where are the Julius Nyereres of this generation? That's that's the place where Africans used to put their best leadership foot forward. Today, an AU meeting takes place, and the story is about the foreign president or the foreign leaders who come to address the AU. But, and I will repeat this, Charles, I've said this before in other discussions, I'll repeat it. Can African heads of state please stop going to other people's capitals to attend Africa summits? The AU should be the place where we invite. Now, we should have a week, we should have a day for Chinese, a day for Japanese, a day for Americans, a day for the Europeans, a day for the Australians. Let them come and find our leaders in Addis Ababa and we talk about the African agenda. Why are we flying all over the world? TICAD, Japan. Blah, blah, blah. No, I really, the Middle East, let them come to Addis and meet with us and we define the agenda. If Africa does that, it will be the beginning of reasserting our position.
Listen,
Good morning.
we are talking of reforms, welcome, Adesua.
Good morning,
We're glad
everyone.
you could make it. We know in Nigeria you guys want to, you show up after the masses have sat down and.
Oh no. Oh
But
no. I like to know I'm 3 minutes early. I'm right on
but
time.
but Lisa, your report addresses the issues that Bob and Fred have touched on. You talk of a pragmatic shift in peacekeeping. I think that's the language you use, and you suggest that the AU should stop relying on formal institutions and instead stand to concerts of states, which basically are informal groups of neighboring countries, or basically the coalition of the willing, and basically as the last line of defense against total regional chaos. I'm telling you, that is one of, I guess, the boldest things I've had on the AU. How would that work? I mean, this era of the coalition of the willing, how would that work? Wouldn't that subvert, uh, you know, uh, the organization? And where would it work? Give us an example.
Yes, I mean it's really not a new idea, Charles. You know, when the African Union was created in 2002, there was a lot of that idea of the coalition of the willing was something almost built in. Let's say, for example, two of the structures that the Bekis or Basanjos, envisaged of the African Union. NEPAD, it was a coalition of the willing. You signed up, and there was a small group of states, founding fathers of NEPAD to this day. Fred would know. Then it broadened because then they didn't have enough money, so it became a regular organ of the African Union that everybody signed up in. Okay, APRM. These are all structures which, I mean, experimental, I'd say, because some of them worked a little bit for a long time, was dormant, trying to work better now, like NEPAD, the African Union Development Agency. So APRM and NEPAD were small groups, coalitions of the willing. When it comes to peacekeeping, in 2013, former President Jacob Zuma, famous of South Africa, remember there was the French intervention in Mali. The whole continent was embarrassed to say, okay, here's a threat. Why are we calling on France to come in to fight jihadists? And well, at that time, it was the independence groups there in northern Mali. Then they created something that people often forget. It was called ACIRC, the African Capacity for Rapid Intervention into Crisis. It was a coalition of the willing. Few countries signed up. Okay, it was based in Addis Ababa, and there are these army generals who sat for years, spent a lot of money. I mean, we can write a book about that. It didn't work out, but it was based on that idea that willing states or like minded states on the African continent, out of the 55 member states, which is a lot, get together and try new initiatives. Now, what we are saying in our report is in some instances, when there's a crisis, influential neighbors or countries that can mediate or stop a conflict uh, to do it, uh, and at times work together, which is very difficult. I mean, we see, and that's a contrast, I think, with the European Union, which is not, the AU was modeled on the European Union, but it's not. But anyway, there's cooperation between states. If Greece is in great financial trouble, the others get together and bail it out or not. There's trying to, raise the bar in the African continent, and within even our structures of the African Union, there's a lot of competition. Sometimes someone launches something, the others don't. I mean, so what we are saying in our report is be pragmatic. There's a
Yeah.
major crisis. There's an emergency, of conflict. Just to finish off, Charles, on the Sahel, for example, we know that these alliance of Sahel states have been suspended from the African Union due to coups. They're not cooperating with ECOWAS. So what do we do? We can't let structures stand in the way of saving lives and of one country cooperating pragmatically, Ghana cooperating with its neighbors in the central Sahel to share intelligence over a border so that jihadists can stop from advancing to the coast. And I think within ECOWAS, there's been very pragmatic discussions to say, okay, let's appoint an envoy, let's create cooperation,
Mhm.
sometimes within the AU, like for South Sudan, for example. South Africa is leading a thing called the C5, have gotten that the AU created. And it's using that as a vehicle to say, okay, let's get together, let's travel. The ministers traveled in January to South Sudan, of these countries, and say, okay, let's let's collectively see if we can put pressure on Salva Kiir to and the government to well, what the AU has asked for: free Riek Machar, dial down, prevent another escalation and a civil war. It's in the official statements of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. So basically, those states then take that and drive it forward, or as we said, on other
But,
conflicts,
but
the structures have just not worked. Yeah.
Charles, I wanted to just quickly respond to Lizo. Part of the problem is that on the African continent, there is a lot of distrust between individual occupants of the office of president. And I think that really makes collaboration of the nature you are describing, and in part because we have internal weak governance systems, and we also, a lot of the African leaders are agents of competing international interests. There will
And
be,
their egos, even, Bob, their own egos, not
yeah,
wanting to cooperate with one another.
But Adesua, just to pick up on this point, there was a time when you talked of this coalition of the willing, or countries which were able to step out and offer leadership. Nigeria was one of them, but we've kind of lost you. We've not. You failed to give us another Obasanjo. How do you see, either within the presidency of the Tinubu, or perhaps the period there, thereafter, do you actually see that Nigeria, as one of the Africa big boys, is going to step up and offer some leadership, begin to have a greater impact on budgets, for example? You guys have got very deep pockets, so most of your people steal the money. But you could divert that to the AU. Do you see that we will get that from Abuja any day soon?
No. uh, I don't think so. Not under this presidency. If we've been focused on quoting France, America a lot, particularly because of Trump's focus on Christian genocide in Nigeria. The president is particularly close to France, mostly due to his partnership with the longtime businessman Shaguri, who is a French Lebanese man who's French Lebanese Nigerian at this point in time. Nigeria has not necessarily taken a lead role even within ECOWAS anymore. And there seems to be some type of underlying tension between the AES states and Nigeria, particularly when it comes to possible foreign interests like Russia and France in our region. When it comes to funding, Nigeria obviously used to primarily fund ECOMOG and ECOWAS, and we still have a large chunk of the funding coming from Nigeria for ECOWAS. But if we're looking at the AU, I don't think Nigeria is going to be the solution. You need leadership that thinks slightly more continental and long term. I don't necessarily think that that's the focus of this administration. And so if you're talking about the Tinubu administration, no. If we're talking about Nigeria itself, I don't know. It really depends on leadership. A lot of these things depend on leadership. I don't think we have thought about a structure that maintains itself, regardless of who the current president is. When we think about our influence on the continent, if you look at the recent crop of ambassadors, which are now being reported as being stranded because they actually haven't been given their official assignments after being passed by the Senate. If you look at them, most of them are not, diplomats. Most of them don't have foreign experience. It's just people who please the president. And so I'm not entirely sure we should be looking at Nigeria for leadership. I think we should be looking more, if we're thinking even in West Africa, I would look at Ghana. I would look at Ghana. I would look at Mahama. I would look there for leadership before I look at Nigeria and Tinubu.
Fred, we don't have Nigeria, but there is a point you have made, and Lisa has referred to this. We need money to run the organization. We have $400 million in the peace fund. I think that happened as a result of a reform which already had the Paul Kagame reforms. So one, is it possible to amplify this? And why are we not spending this money on Somalia? Because we have come up short on the Somalia mission. So what's going on there? It's
So, Charles, thank you so very much. First and foremost, let me answer quickly your question. Uh, Number one is that the mission in Somalia requires $197 million a year.
Yeah.
And so we have many crises on the continent. So we have not uh, agreed on how we are going to replenish the peace fund. That has been the number one problem that we've been faced with. Until we agree on how we're going to replenish the peace fund, we cannot, be spending left and right. What we've been doing, though, is that we've been using the interest because we invested this money. We've been using the interest to support some of our member states who are having issues. And Somalia actually has gotten the big chunk. I think we have spent almost like $20 million. That's really the big chunk of the money from the peace fund. We have also, and this is extremely important, I think my sister at the source was mentioning this. We have also tried to, I was thinking when she was talking, to use solidarity because solidarity is lacking on the African continent. The Sahel is going because of a lack of solidarity. We tried at some point to come together and say we need to deploy a force to confront the terrorism threat that is in the Sahel. So there we have spent $2 million. We have given 1 million to Burkina Faso. We have given 500,000 to Niger, 500,000 to Mali. So we are using the peace fund. But fundamentally, I think that there is something that we have not mentioned here, Charles, which is extremely important. The other day, I was addressing a group of influencers, and I asked them, "What is Pan Africanism to you?" And many people gave me different answers. This new generation, not everybody agrees or knows what Pan Africanism is all about. We have a crisis of values on the continent. And this translates into those who run for office and come into office, they're elected based on either tribes or things that don't make sense. But by the way, it's not only an African problem, it's a worldwide problem. So we have a crisis of values. I would like to just mention a few things that Robert talked about. Oh, Robert, one of the things that pains me the most, having been in African Union for 17 years, is how Africans don't read about the African Union nor the reports that we produce. We write so many reports. First, on the common African position. By the way, this is what we've been trying to have on different issues. On technology and AI, did you know that we developed a continental artificial intelligence strategy? Most people don't know about this, but it's there. It's out there for everybody to see. On the issues of trade, we came up with the African CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement. But there, we also have and by the way, many member states sign up onto it. I think it's only Eritrea which has not signed up to it. But I can tell you that we have the CFTA. But the problem there, again, is you sign the Continental Free Trade Agreement, but you don't sign the protocol on the free movement of people and goods. Only 4 member states have signed the protocol on the free movement of people and goods. So how are you going to trade? So it's these contradictions that causes us a problem. Then, Charles, on the issue of the summits, I think that Robert mentioned, it's very important. As a matter of fact, on the 13th, which is 2 days from, there will be an Italy Africa summit. It will happen in Addis Ababa, Robert. That will make you happy. And then there will be on the 11th of May, there will be
Finally.
11, 16, finally, it's 11, 16th of May, there will be a France Africa summit as well, which will happen in Nairobi, which will be a first, which is good. Lizo, on the issue of peacekeeping, and this is very important, Charles. On the issue of peacekeeping, we are seeing a new phenomenon which is emerging. Back in the days, what we used to do was an African mission would deploy with the understanding that the UN would then take over to do peacekeeping, right? The first thing that we did is we changed peacekeeping because for us, we call it peace support operation. which means it involves combat, right? So that has been the first transition that has happened, and it started with AMISOM. And of course, Lizo talked about Mali and elsewhere. So there was a transition. And then we saw the birth of what we call the ad hoc coalitions, which are temporary and which are task specific. Like, for example, the MNJTF fighting Boko Haram in Nigeria. They have done a great job, but it's because Nigeria actually has put in a lot of work. They are really the one holding it together. But now the new phenomenon, and this is the new emerging trend, is what we call bilateral cooperation. This is what you've seen between Rwanda and Mozambique, for example. So the interesting part is that the key organ that decides on peace and security matters in the African Union has endorsed actually such bilateral mechanism. So what happens is this: they come to the AU Peace and Security Council and say, "Hey, we are going to intervene in Mozambique in Cabo Delgado province to deal with the threat of Al Shabaab there." And so the AU endorses it, and when they endorse it, when the Peace and Security Council endorses it, it allows basically the bilateral arrangement to seek actually funding even from external partners. So this is what has happened in Mozambique, and I can show you different examples. And why do countries preferring bilateral arrangements? Because it's much faster. The deployment is fast, and I think that they're not so much bound by some of our bureaucracies that we have to deal with. So yes, so these are some of the things that I wanted to mention. But the most important thing, Charles, I think I said earlier that the AU is a reflection of how our member states are doing. The lack of solidarity, and quite frankly, there is one thing we have not managed to do in many of our countries. We have built nations, but we have not built viable states. And so, if you don't have viable states, you cannot have a continental organization which can deliver. I'm saying this because we like to talk about our region, but when you go to Kabushenga, where is your hometown again? You said it was what, Robert?
It is the
That hometown
Switzerland
of
of
yours,
Africa.
the Kigezi. Is it Kigezi?
Yes, which is in the southwest of Uganda. It's at the border with
Southwest of
Rwanda.
Uganda.
Yes.
Exactly, with the border with Rwanda. But I
Yeah.
said, imagine this: when you go to Kampala and you look at all the infrastructure that is in Kampala, and then you go into these peripheral, Kigezi, or you go to Bunyoro or elsewhere. I'm giving Uganda as an example. When you look at the presence of the state, you will find that in most of these places, the state is just a police station, a prison. But when you look at the delivery of services, it's not there. Adesua, in your country as well, in Nigeria, the same thing. In my country, Burundi, outside of Bujumbura, you go into the rural areas, there's no state. And so we need to build not only
There are
nations,
post-
but we need to
there
also
are
have.
posters and photos of the president everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
But you guys, okay, taking on from there, and I think Bob touched on this issue. You talked about leaders. One of the things that's happening, and Lizo, you people, you touch on this in your report, is the rotational chairmanship or chairpersonship of the AU has come up. Fred's president, Évariste Ndayishimiye,
Ndayishimiye.
has taken over from Angola, but the interesting thing is that one of the big conflicts we have is DRC Congo, Eastern DRC, and Burundi, and particularly, President Ndayishimiye is a combatant on one side of that conflict. So how, at least when it was Mozambique, or on that one, no, sorry, when it was Angola, or on that one, they are not so directly involved. How do we see the next year playing out? How is Ndayishimiye as AU chair going to deal with the issues of Eastern DRC? So will even anyone take his leadership on it seriously? I mean, can he convince anyone that he comes with clean hands? And how does that situation complicate the work of the African Union? Fred, you don't have to say anything on this. Bob,
No,
talk
no, no.
about
I
it.
actually, I actually want to quickly before Lizzo come in. I actually want to
Okay.
mention
No, no, Fred,
a very.
let Bob let
Oh, okay,
Bob
good.
start with it, and then you will close it diplomatically for us. Bob,
Okay, thank you.
I
Yes,
Charles.
Charles, I just want to
yeah,
come back to Angola. Bob, is
Mhm.
that okay? Or do
Yeah,
you want
Lizzo,
to
please go ahead.
also
Please go
ask a
ahead.
question?
yeah. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah,
just go
because
ahead.
the thing with the chair, we've had years that the chair is almost non-existent and, does has one meeting. It is an important job because then you set the agenda. If you're a chair, and there are meetings of even the ministers or so on, the chair of the year, then, and it's also important just to have bureaucracy behind you. But okay, Angola, I think, has been one of the most successful chairs of the African Union because, I mean, and we talked about infrastructure and so on. The in Angola, in Luanda, we've had meetings on infrastructure. The commissioner for infrastructure is Lerato Mataboge, is South African, and on all fronts. And Lorenzo has been very, very active, appointing a special envoy here, trying things, and he is still, the African Union did this thing of champions a couple of years ago. Also, it's a bit like the chair. Either you take on that role and you run with it and you take initiatives, or you don't. And so Lorenzo is the champion for peace and reconciliation. We always just looked at him as the AU, as the Great Lakes mediator. But now he's kind of persisting doggedly on this thing. And even on the Great Lakes, we see him engaging with Togo. He I think was behind appointing Togo as a mediator. He's now meeting with him. And so in May, there's going to be an extraordinary summit of the AU on conflict prevention. So Angola stepped back as chair, but is still trying hard. And we could talk about summits, summits and the jamboree that you were talking about, Bob. I think it's not
Bob,
too bad. If you were in the times of Muammar Gaddafi, when he was at the AU, it was much worse. So, so we're having another summit. Ndayishimiye, Fred can talk about him. I think he might just do other things, water is the theme of the year for the African Union for 2026. I'm not sure at what degree will be able to navigate this very complex, very, very complex Eastern DRC, Burundi, Rwanda dynamics, which we talk about in our report. But next year it will be Ghana. So we might see other, initiative. A year is not long.
no.
So this chairship is really something you can make of it what you want as a head of state. I'll hand over to Fred on Burundi.
Bob, then Fred on.
Mhm.
Yes,
This is
Bob.
what I think. This is what I think. We should scrap this whole business of chairpersons by heads of states. No, this rotational chair should go away. Let's take a leaf from other organizations around the world. The EU or NATO or United Nations or even ASEAN, if you go to Asia, there is no rotational chair by a country. What they do is
It is, Bob. Sorry to interrupt you. It's a 6 month chairing at
where
the EU, in any case.
who
At
yeah,
the
but you
EU,
see,
Yes,
you have a
we.
country. Yeah.
yes, but my point is that what they do is they select the head of the EU as a very substantive and competent person who then runs with the roles that we're looking at. So
Yeah.
otherwise, you have guys who are not even competent to run their own countries or even physically able to run their own countries. And you want to give them the complex task of leading a continent in a world in which you have very strategic thinkers and actors like Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, you are setting these people up and the continent for a disaster. Some of these people can only manage a few complex issues in their countries. They can't manage. They don't even understand. For instance, if you made some of these people governor of Lagos, they would die from failure. They just can't handle. Or you send them to run the Western Cape. They can't do these things. But you want them to chair the big issues of the continent. I think what we should do is that the job that I think is run by the diplomat, the former foreign minister of Djibouti, what's it called? AU chair or something? I don't even know now. So the AU
Yeah.
chair,
EU chair, yeah.
the mission chair should be a person who has served at the level of head of state and has the political skills to drive or is qualified to be a head of state. We should have that minimum standard. Then the rest of this work that you're talking about can be done by him. Now, the ceremonial aspects, the 6 monthly thing, or the one like, for instance, the EU, or in our case, the 1 year, can just be for patronage and making the people of a country happy, but it cannot be the driver of the African agenda. It will not be. It's not possible because some of these people, even as African, they owe greater allegiance to other parts of the world than to the continent. If they are called to Washington, they will go. If they are called to Beijing, they will go. If they are called to Dubai, they will go. You call them to a meeting in Addis Ababa, they send a junior foreign minister. What are we talking about? So that's my point.
Fred,
That we,
eh? I,
Well,
I want you to disabuse Bob. Bob is supposed to be a Pan-African, but he's committing heresy. Eh?
no, I mean it's okay. I mean Bob is allowed to talk like that, but I will tell you one thing. First and foremost, the chairperson of the African Union, I'm not talking about the chairperson of the Commission. He doesn't come in a vacuum. On the DRC, there is an AU position, which is that we call for the implementation of the Washington and the Doha process. And we have actually appointed the president of Togo, Faure Simbe Eyadema, who is backed by 5 former presidents to lead the AU efforts on the DRC. So the president of Burundi, even though he may be an actor one way or the other, he will have to support what the AU has decided. And I would like to also say that the chair of the union, he's not like a CEO who comes and dictates things. He is backed by a bureau. And the bureau is composed of who? It's composed of the outgoing Angola, which is going to be the rapporteur, and then it's composed of the current chair, Burundi, which will be backed by Ghana, because after Burundi it will be Ghana, and then after Ghana it will be Tanzania. So he cannot make a decision on his own. And then there is also the chairperson of the commission, His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, who is also part of it. So the AU has very, very clear positions on all these different conflicts, whether it's on Libya. On Libya, we're seeking reconciliation of the parties and a return to constitutional order. On Sudan, we're seeking a ceasefire, a political process, a humanitarian truce. So we have positions on all these conflicts, and so he will come only to steer to push for those jobs. So basically, people are making it. It is a big deal, but it's not what people think that it is, because there are positions which are already taken by the Assembly of Heads of State. Let me tell you, Bob, Charles, the heads of state last year, they pronounced themselves on Gaza, they pronounced themselves on Libya, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, and so on and so forth. They just pronounced themselves on the same during the summit. So his job will be to implement the decision of the assembly. That's what the chair will do. So it's not necessarily what most people think. That the chair will
Yeah,
do.
Fred.
But
Okay. You've really batted very well for the AU. I can see why they have kept you there for. I know, Bob, and I know Bob and Lizzo have to run, but let us close on an issue which has become a very big issue and is centered in West Africa as of now in Nigeria. And when I speak to some diplomats in the region, they actually tell us that we should pay attention to what this Trump's position on Christian persecution. The Americans have now moved in. They have sent in a mission, uh, Addis Ababa in Nigeria. They are requesting. I think they are talking of setting up a drone base. Addis Ababa. It seems that all of a sudden this whole thing has expanded, and what what are we getting into here, and how do you see this fitting into this broader Africa security framework?
So I think there's a little bit of precedence here when it comes to American interests in Nigeria's security situation. We must look back at 2014, 2013 with Bring Back Our Girls. If you remember, Obama at that point in time, there was a significant pushback from President Obama. A lot of Nigerians take problem with his stance towards Nigeria because of the anti-gay laws that were passed, calling for punishment for being gay, prison term, I believe, of 15 years for being gay, and possibly, I think, at some point in time, a death penalty was being discussed, but it wasn't put in our laws. At that point in time, the Goodluck Jonathan government said that America withdrew funding that we were using to fight terrorists because of the anti-gay laws. This was a huge topic in Nigeria. I think that's the first time we've seen a cultural issue in America, which, whether it's liberalism and, pride, we see a cultural issue in America be exported to Nigeria, because a lot of those who sponsored the anti-gay laws here in Nigeria were actually American evangelicals, and then that affect our security situation. It seems like a very weird thread to draw from a Southern Baptist in Texas all the way to helping terrorism grow in Nigeria, but that's really how the thread progressed. So we can't look at it starting from Trump. When we now look at what is going on with Donald Trump, and this focus on a Christian genocide, it actually starts from that same camp, that American Christian nationalist camp, the same camp that led us to the Bring Back Our Girls and the mass kidnappings we were seeing and lack of funding for fighting Boko Haram. It's the same camp that has come now to focus on Christian genocide in Nigeria. What I think this means, because you spoke about the drone base, there's rumors now that there might be a stronger American presence on ground. What I think this is essentially them just trying to strengthen their position on the continent and use Nigeria to do so. And I don't necessarily think that this is a Donald Trump thing himself, because I don't trust Trump's long-term thinking, but there are definitely with people within
if
the
any.
American system who he's a very emotional guy. Just whatever he sees on Fox and Friends that morning is what's going to be the national, plan for America. But if you look at America's, even their policy documents that are coming out and stuff, it's all America first, but America first in a very different way. They're no longer trying to focus on soft power. It's America first, like having boots on the ground, showing your strength in all the possible ways. I definitely think there are people within the system who would want a stronger base in Africa, and Nigeria makes sense for them to do that after what we've seen with the Sahel military juntas kicking them out of Niger. I think Nigeria makes sense. I don't think, we can look at the Christian genocide angle, we can look at all those angles. It plays well with the base, but I do think that this is more geopolitical, and I think the Nigerian government understand that, because they've been trying to fight to not look weak as they get taken for a ride. Right? They keep saying, "Oh, we haven't lost our sovereignty," but they want to just refuel their drones. Just say they want a base. We haven't lost our sovereignty. They work with us to come and bomb. on Christmas Day, which I think Donald Trump called a Christmas present. So they keep trying to say we're working with the Americans because they don't want to lose face at home. But I definitely think that this is a power play for America. What does this mean for security on the continent? I don't I don't know. I haven't seen a positive outcome, whether it's France or whether it's Russia, uh, or whether it's America. I haven't seen long-term positivity. I don't think we've built up our own internal strengths enough, and we just take help from abroad without really without long-term success. You know, Ambassador Ngonga spoke about the multi-nation task force, which has done a really good work in Lake Chad region, fighting Boko Haram. But in terms of now us getting Lakurawa, that's coming from Niger. That's a new terrorist group that we're dealing with here. So this, I don't think this American interest is necessarily going to be positive long term. I think we need African solutions, and we need more of our name. I think we need to strengthen our subgroups like ECOWAS, like SADC. I think that is what's going to get us out of trouble. I don't necessarily believe it's the AU, but it's definitely not going to be America.
Um, let us wrap it up. Let us start with Lizo. We've had now we have a sense of the issues around the summit. In 30 seconds, how do you see the rest of the year playing out in Africa? Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic? Are you still in the middle, deciding which way to jump?
I think we're very worried as crisis group, but myself as well. What Adesoa was explaining, this unpredictability, a more dangerous world, the guardrails that we had. I know, we've all listened to Marconi. There was a lot of hypocrisy about the international system, but there was the UN. We could count on certain structures and certain diplomatic protocol, I would say, and all of that is now so unpredictable. We really, really need some kind of answer, from collective answer, in many ways, from African states and then neighbors. I mean, our focus has been on trying to stop wars, get ceasefires, get mediation going, and it's certainly going to be a difficult year. I think the African Union will have to step up to the plate, and also, as you said, regional economic communities are pretty much divided. Some of them are a little bit stronger than others, but it's going to be a difficult year, I think, Charles. I think we can't get away from that.
Fred?
Thank you, Charles. I'm going to say that number one thing that we need, I started by talking about African solidarity, which is extremely important because the crisis we're faced with, um, they are unprecedented. And in fact, there is even a risk that even the borders that we inherited from colonialism may be challenged. Right now, the global competition that exists, they are going for maritime routes and they're going for minerals. So even in fact, as Adesua just mentioned, actually, I think that what is happening in Nigeria with the Trump administration, it's also look at the location of Nigeria, and you think about the Silk and Belt Road, right?
Mm.
So it's all about positioning the U.S. to counter what do I call this? To counter basically the Chinese Silk and Belt Road. And you look at everywhere where they are, the politics is based on that. But they also have middle powers, which they are using. And we did talk about the middle powers. An increasingly role about from the UAE. Actually, the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and the UAE is going to be playing out significantly in the coming days. This is something to monitor because it affects not only West Africa, Libya, but also the Horn and the Great Lakes. So because they are also interested in ports, energy and the supply routes. So this is something that we need to look into. But I will say for me, I think the number one thing that we need to do as Africans, and Bob, I think touched on it. He talked about the mistrust between the leaders. But at least our heads of intelligence should get together and reflect on how do we position Africa in
Mhm.
this environment? And it's all about, for me, the Chinese, they call it Weiji. For every crisis, there's an opportunity, right? I think there is an opportunity for us also to focus on economic growth out of this crisis. They want our minerals, fine, but let's negotiate in a way that we can also benefit in building our industries, our roads, and our infrastructure. There are ways we can actually also position ourselves. But yes, it's going to be turbulent. But for some reason, I think that we will survive this. But what I worry most for me is actually our demographics and the youth unemployment, that we can't seem to find a solution to this issue. That scares me more than the geopolitics currently. Thank you, Charles.
Bob, close it out.
What I would add to the suggestion of Fred about intelligence officers, if I was the chair now of AU, which unfortunately will never happen, but let me pretend that I am the chair of AU.
Or
There are,
fortunately.
I would summon certain categories of African leadership for a session on redefining Africa's place. Who would I call? I would call the president of the African Development Bank, the president of the Afri-Exim Bank. I would call the secretaries general of all the regional organizations. I would call in the best minds of Africa that are not necessarily in political spaces. By political space, I mean in government, because they are dealing with different parts of the world and with different players, and they would help to define which direction and what kinds of choices that the continent can make and recommend them to individual countries. Because those people acting together have the capacity to define, to know what to do and what not to do. Individual countries are constrained by the limitations they have, either of information or resources, to define a good position. And we have some really, really good minds running continental organizations, AFCTA, IACO, I don't know who. There are so many dotted, but if you brought those people into a room and you listen to them, and I agree with you, Fred, together with the intelligence guys, because those guys are collecting so much information, we can craft a continental direction. But since I am not chair, I would then appeal to Lizo and say, Lizo, the crisis group can actually get these people together easily in a location. Or if somebody has the ear of Mo Ibrahim, suggest it to him. Let these guys do these meetings, and we craft an African position that becomes a systematic response to all of these things. Right now, we're just knee-jacking our way into existence, or maybe even into a suicidal situation. I don't know. But that's really, if we had a reference thinking process that people can refer to deal with the future, I think those are the resources we can rely on to do that.
Wonderful.
There's a dishwasher.
I must say again, as we said at the start, thank you, Fred. Thank you, Lizo. There is no good, as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. So your punishment is that we are going to bring you back. We are going to bring you back.
Good to see you again, Ambassador Fred.
Yes, we are going to bring you
We
back.
did the same trial in Harvard, remember?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I was wondering, where do I know you?
You see.
Uh-huh.
And for our listeners and viewers, if you like this program, please hit the like and the subscribe button, and follow us on the rest of our other channels. And as always, it's been wonderful.